And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 268. Today we're talking about the idea of reflections in photography, how they can add depth and narrative and all sorts of extra levels to your photography. So that's what we're going to be chatting about. If you happen to be watching live, leave a comment, let me know you're here and we can make a start. Yes, and so welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 268. So yes, today is the notion of reflections. But like I say, we happen to be live here on YouTube. If you are watching live, then leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Let me know what the weather's doing. Let me know where you are in the world if you're not one of the regulars and this is your first time here. If you're not watching live, you can still leave a comment down below. If you're watching on YouTube, do watch it on YouTube. Leave it on the comments below. Or if you happen to be watching it on Spotify. Yes, oddly enough, I'm playing around with the idea of actually having I've got about last five episodes uploaded to Spotify to see whether it will make any difference. I don't think it is. Not sure how long I will carry on with it. Anyway, that aside, yes, so I can see we've got a couple of people in already. So let's take a quick look at the comments. And Robert says, howdy all from a cold and overcast Texas. April says, good morning from a sunny Long Island, New York. So quite a bit of difference between Long Island, New York and Texas. And Susan says, hello from a very wet and very dark Kakubri. Oh, yes, Kakubri is just 5 miles down the road here, or 9 miles down the road here from Castle Douglas. And it is very wet, very cold, very wintry, just weather out there at the moment. Right, so... Marilyn has hello all from a sunny Colorado. Okay, so we have sunny, we have cold, we have wet. We've got we've got quite the weather around the world so far. Right, so let's make a little start. And what we're talking about today is the idea of reflections. So, well, I suppose really, he's a quick update on with the smug points. Part of the thing with the smug points with this podcast is if you contribute to the podcast, you get smug points. And the more you contribute in different ways, the more smug points you accumulate. And if you accumulate most smug points in any 1 month, you get to set the topic and challenge for the following month. Now, you get... So what happened is in November, in the end, Nicola was our standout winner with 80 smug points accumulated. By and large, she got most of that because she put in, we had 2 feedback sessions and she put images in for that. If you stick an image in for feedback session, you get 25 smug points. You also, by the way, get 5 smug points just for saying hello here live. So if you happen to be watching live, leave a comment, let me know you're here, and you get your bonus 5 smug points just for turning up. So Robert was a very close second with 75 smug points, and VG was in third place with 60 smug points for November. Excuse me. So what that means is Nicola got to choose the topic. So I was chatting away to Nicola, messaging offline, or, well, not offline, away from the podcast. And I was asking what she wanted. And she said, well, she really wanted to get to know a bit more about reflections. And I thought, well, I have done reflections in the past. And it's one of these things that kind of crops up. But the reality is this podcast has been running for 5.5 years. And it's at least 2.5 years since I did my podcast on reflections. And with all these things, can I really expect you, the viewers, or anybody who turns up here to remember everything that was being said before? Or to go, okay, there's 267 previous episodes of this. Where do I find the bit on reflections to go scrolling back through to? Now, some people might, and that's great. And I would remind anybody that actually here on the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres YouTube channel, if you go and take a look, there are 267 previous episodes jam-packed full of all sorts of amazing bits of information on all these variety of topics on photography. So it is all there. However, given the fact that it is 2.5 years since we last broached the topic really in any depth, I thought, well, okay, let's go with that. So today's episode is all about reflections, and I'm going to be talking about the kind of key ways we can look at the idea of using reflections in our photography, with half an eye on the fact that, given the fact that the vast majority of viewers tend to use their photography in competitions or challenges, where not just, well, you can use it for yourself, of course you can, but there are things like online sites like PhotoCrowd, ViewBug, Guru Shots and what have you, who have daily challenges which you can stick in images in for. Or maybe you belong to a camera club and periodically one of these topics crops up in your camera club. And how do you best approach these kind of topics? So with one eye on that, but at the same time, it's not just about the competitions. It's all about improving our own photography, and looking for opportunities to find ways to improve our understanding and things to photograph, how to improve our photos. So that's kind of what it's all about. Oh, Janet's joined us all, says hi from a chilly Mississauga. So yes, Janet's in Canada, so probably I would guess has the lowest temperature of any of us watching at the moment. Right, okay, so, oh, Meg's joined us as well, says hello everybody, but I know Meg's downstairs at the moment here in the house, so I know the weather there isn't any colder than it is here. Right, so what we're going to be talking about then is the notion of the reflections. And reflection, by and large, is going to be kind of three different areas that I'm going to cover with reflections. We're going to kind of look at the notion of water. We're going to look at the notion of mirrors, and then we're going to look at the notion of windows. And each of these being and with a couple of other weird distorting surfaces in between. So these are kind of broad outlines, but each of them has different qualities. Each of them has maybe where we would take the photo or how we would take the photo would differ. Generally speaking, we're going to do something slightly different with a lake than we are with a mirror or a window or something like that. But within reflections, there's also a whole wide other range of things, which is an idea that sometimes the reflection is in a supporting role. So you've got your main topic, your main narrative, and then the reflection is kind of adding to that. Sometimes the reflection is the narrative. The reflection is the key part of the narrative, and actually what's around the reflection is the kind of in the supporting role. And sometimes it's a kind of a direct split, so that the subject and the reflection are both equal parts of the narrative. And if you remove one or the other, you actually don't really have the photo at all, or you just have to change the narrative completely. You've kind of lost that. So that's kind of where we're going to be talking today about this. Now, I will just do a quick little tidy up of the desktop here. Oh, Janet says actually, in terms of temperature, not that bad, just below freezing, -1. Oh, okay. Practically t-shirt and shorts weather in Canada, I think. Right, so what I'm going to do then is, just ended up closing the wrong. Yeah, open that one back up again, right? Right, so let me open a photo over here and let me press that and swing over to here. So some of you might notice this. Oh, John's joined us, says hello again from Ohio. Hi, John, glad you could make it along. So I thought this was probably a good one to start with. Gives us this idea of a really full-on reflection. Some of you may remember this is my favourite aurora photo. Here in Scotland, we don't tend to get the aurora that often, probably more often than further south. But then trying to get a decent photo of it, isn't always that easy. And a couple of years ago, I managed to go out and it was a cold night, but there was no breeze, no wind whatsoever. Water was absolutely mirror-like. And there was the aurora in the sky. And I managed to find this place on Loch Ken, which was just the loch runs kind of north to south, and I was out on a little bit of beachy bit, that kind of stones that kind of came out and allowed me to look straight up and get this wonderful reflection. So in this case, yes, the aurora is the key narrative, but the reflection is what makes the picture really with this. I mean, fair enough. You could join in and I could cut it down to something like that. And that's not a bad photo. It's kind of okay. But there isn't necessarily a kind of, these trees down the bottom are barely registering. The horizon's too thin. But when you kind of pull out and you have that reflection, so it's the reflection then that is actually making the photo. What's that? Oh, April's just chatting to Janet about being too cold for her in Canada. Lisa's joined us and says hello. Oh, sorry, I'm late. Oh, glad you could make it along, Lisa. Okay, so let's take another idea. So similar kind of idea. You don't have to be out on a chilly evening. Here's another lake. This is down in Dalbeattie. And if you, so you, there's a little walk around. It's not a huge lake. This is a small lake, a small loch in Dalbeattie. And there's a woodland walk you can go around and walk around this. And just standing the other side of it, looking across the water, is this bench here is a kind of favourite sitting place to sort of just sit and stare back out across the loch, or feed the ducks from, or whatever you want to do. But again, absolutely still water. And what you find is with something like this, you've got this absolute mirror reflection. It's a 50-50 split on this, to the point whereby if I was to rotate the photo, it's barely noticeable that it is rotated. Okay, so you can just about, okay, so the trees are not quite in focus there, but actually when you come down to the bottom part, actually right at the edge of the water, you can barely tell which way round it's supposed to be. And if you're only looking at this, say, on a phone or a small tablet or something like that, or at a distance, it would be pretty difficult to see. And in fact, actually, if you rotated it halfway, sort of a 90-degree kind of rotation, it sort of starts to become almost abstract. It looks like sort of some spine kind of going up with bits coming out the back. And so that notion of the complete mirror reflection becomes quite interesting. Another one, again, this one's Carlingwalk Loch, bottom of Castle Douglas here. Just after sunset, blue hour time, literal blue hour, and again it's absolutely mirror calm. The difference between the top and the bottom is really just that it's a little bit darker down here. And again, if I was to rotate like this, you're almost hard pressed to kind of figure out which is the reflection and which is the actual sky. The distance is so far, but okay, so here we can see that the reflection is stretched out just a little bit here rather than just being the dot, and you can zoom in and we can see the lines, but there's not a lot in it, so that again becomes the idea of the picture is that there's this sort of 50-50 side of it. Meg says absolutely beautiful. Yeah, there's something very pleasing about. So if you can get down to a body of water, if you can get down to a lake, a loch, a pond even, and you can get that point whereby there's barely a breath of air, that there's no ripples on it at all, then you end up with this really lovely kind of reflection. So in this case, the reflection is absolutely integral part of the narrative. It's not the sky and the reflection is the supporting level. It's not the reflection is the key thing and the sky is supporting it. It's all about the fact that you've got this 50-50 split in the narrative. Nick's joined us. Nicholas joined us. Says, hello, Kim. Thanks for just checking in again. So sorry. Okay, well, glad you could make it, especially because this is Nicola who chose the topic of reflections, which is what we're talking about today. So glad you made it along, Nicola. Now, with each of the ones that I've shown you so far, from that and that to this and this, we've got a very clear horizon line, and then we flip it. Where it becomes really interesting, again, if you're down at that kind of body of water, is, say, on something like a foggy day. So if you go into something like this with a foggy day, where we've got the line of the horizon here, but it then disappears off the end here. Because the fog is there, because the fog, the bank of the fog is now, we can't see the any further deeper into it. We can't see the land behind it. It sort of drops off the end as such, and that becomes quite interesting. Oh, yeah, Nadia's joined us from Fife as well. Glad you could join us, Nadia. And again, we've got this absolute mirror-like quality here and when you get that fog and stillness of air, run and find a loch, run and find a garden pond for that matter. It's where you get no ripples and you get the fog. You get this particularly interesting kind of effect going on. And again, I can rotate that and you'd be hard pushed to know that this is the upside down version. is maybe slightly given away by the fact that this bit is higher up than that bit, but it's almost like the bank is curved. But that's not. But you know, I mean, we look at the detail in the hut here and the hut here, and in the reflection, we're still seeing all the tiles on the broken roof. You know, we still got all the little details of the tree. You really are hard pushed. So, you know, this kind of there we go. Absolute reflection is kind of a fun way of doing things. Oh, April says, I like this foggy reflection shot. Yeah. Here's another one where you're getting layers, and it's less now about the what's directly, you know, just there on the horizon, but you've got a bit of a horizon where the trees here are disappearing in the distance, but we've got these reeds in the kind of mid-ground here. And these reeds here, if we zoom in like that, start to become extraordinarily sort of abstract. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But it's the things that the other, you know, so you've got this thing with fog whereby you can get layers as well building up. So it's multiple reflections. So in the foreground, we've just got these darker bits of branch hanging over on the right, which is reflected in down here. Then a little bit further back, we can see the trees just disappearing into the fog. This again is Loch Ken, slightly different place where I'm standing, but it's looking up the loch, and so the mist is really kind of obscuring the background for this. But this little bed of reeds here becomes quite interesting too. So we've got this kind of you know, can't tell where the background is. Other ideas then, I mean, straightforwardly, swan on a loch. Now, in a case like this, it's still very, very smooth water. And in fact, I think this was also on a fairly foggy day. It's just we're kind of a bit away from it. Rotate it. It's not as accurately, you know, mirrored. You know, we can tell now because from here we're kind of looking we're looking up at the swan on the water, and the reflection is slightly darker, so we don't necessarily have the same kind of thing, but all the same, that kind of mirror reflection is really, you know, quite a strong one. So if you can get the kind of the birds down on the water, then that's another way of getting your reflections. Oh, Viji's joined us from Chennai in India. Welcome, Viji. Glad you could make it. But you can still get interesting reflections even if you're not trying to go for the absolutely smooth. I mean, in this case here, this is back actually at the Dalbeattie Woods, the Loch and Dalbeattie Woods, which I can't remember the name of the duck. And we've got the duck in the water, but what is also making the interesting part of this photo is the reflection of it. Now, this reflection is much less clear. If I turn it this way round, it's very obvious, you know, it's obscured by the ripples. But those ripples are also creating part of that reflection becomes a really important part of the narrative of what we're looking at here. It's not just a duck, it is a duck on the water. And this is a sunny day rather than a foggy day. So again, playing around with a notion of water, you can go for this idea of the complete 50-50, you know, this is what it's all about, where you can rotate it and you can't tell the difference, through to, well, it's a fairly obvious kind of something floating on the water with ripples and everything else. Another version of this, actually, this boat wreck, and I'm trying to remember, this is Argyll and Bute, I think. Can't remember exact location of it. But there's a boat wreck sitting in a sea loch. So the tide is coming in and out. But it's still it's you know, the water's quite smooth. We've got quite a good reflection here. But we've got little clumps of seaweed coming on. But at the same time, you know, that this reflection here is an absolute key part of the narrative. If it had been a slightly breezier day and we'd had ripples here and you hadn't really got the reflection, it would have still been maybe an interesting photo, but maybe I would have constructed it slightly differently. I've deliberately put it here so that we have this kind of symmetry going on and we're getting these triangular diamond type shapes out of the boat wreck. So there is so that's what. Now, if we flip back, go on to the next bit, say where we're playing around with the fog and the layers, but something that becomes quite interesting is when you start rotating images and what have you. So in this case, what we've got is we've got seagulls. Now, here we're down at Carling Walk Loch again, but actually what's happened is the loch had frozen or part frozen. So there's bits of ice and then there's bits which are starting to melt. So if we look at this little kind of clump over here, we can see that there's little ripples. But here, the seagulls are actually standing on the ice. So their reflections are really quite amazing. But when we rotate this, if we do something like this, something quite bizarre seems to happen, because the reflections here still feel like the gulls standing on the ice, but now this bit in the background is lower than they are. And it's a little bit of a kind of a fun mind twist when you start playing around with things like this. Another example is where you can have fun. So this one again, Carling Walk Loch. In fact, just to give you a sense of this little, if you look at this little island of trees here, it's the same island of trees over here. Or was it that one? I think it's that one. Carling Walk Loch has a couple of little islands of trees. However, here what we have is we have a fallen tree or fallen logs sticking out of the water. Again, calm day, so we've got these reflections. And these reflections then are absolutely part of the narrative with this. If you rotate it, we end up with this sort of weird idea that this bit down here, our brain naturally starts to think that this bottom part is the loch. And then what we have is these other things floating in the sky, which is quite strange. And in fact, if we go on to something like this one, which again, Carling Walk Loch again, different angle again. So we've got the sunset, sun's just disappearing behind the trees over there. We've got these wonderful cloud patterns, very smooth water. We've got, again, a different fallen log in here. You rotate that, and this is practically, well, depending on your imagination, it's practically dragon flying through the sky over the loch. I definitely think this has got a kind of dragon-like element to it. Not entirely sure what it's chasing, but there you go. Oh, April says beautiful shot. Thank you. So sometimes this notion of reflections you can take and you can rotate and you can come up with kind of interesting, fun photos in their own right. So yeah, it's that I think it is this thing. There is this notion with reflections that reflections kind of take us into a different world. That reflections aren't our world. That whole Alice through the looking glass idea is that somehow the reflected world is a parallel universe. It's like our world, but it isn't the same because things are the other way round. And if you invert things, you don't end up with just exactly the same. You can end up with something quite different. So you've got that. Now, if we go back to this idea of actually where you can really go abstract with your... So in this case, again, what we've got is we've got a foggy day and I've got some reeds. And the reeds in the loch, the fog is there, so there's no sense of background. There's no sense of where the sky ends, where the water begins. The only thing giving it away, really, is the tiny little bits of where the water's on the edge of the reeds and you're getting the water tension, just capturing the edges there. But because of the reflection, again, you could kind of rotate it. And still not, and I suppose the reflection's slightly darker than the original. But if you wanted, you could play around with that, a little bit of contrast, put it into black and white, and you could end up with something quite different. Again, this one here, you know, where you've taken is a single kind of little, or two little reeds coming up with leaves sticking out, and you've got these wonderful little diagonals. And then you can move this around the page because, you know, if you were putting this in Photoshop, you could shift it backwards and forwards, and because the background is basically plain. So at this point, we're getting very much into kind of graphic design in a lot of ways. We're abstracting. We're taking away our framework of how to see something. without seeing the water, without seeing the edge of the lake, without seeing the sky, without seeing a boat, without seeing ripples, we've removed our context for what it is we're looking at. And as such, that's where we're abstracting the image, we're taking out of it, so that the brain has to start working that little bit more to try and work out what it is, or indeed abandon the idea of what it actually is and just enjoy it for the shapes that it has in its own right, which is another really interesting part of abstract. April says cool abstract. Susan says loving the reeds and the grass, great abstracts. Yeah, thank you. So you can do something like this. So let me show you this one. So these twigs sitting out here are, if I go back to, not that one, where were we? Yes, this one, sorry, unrotated. So we've got this tree falling in here, and you see these two bits where we've got little branches sticking out. These are the same ones, just taken on a slightly mistier day on this. And we can see that that's, now at the moment, you see, this is what I mean, is we've got the background here, and these little clumps of trees in the background, and we can just about make it, the fog's just starting to lift here, we can just about make out the horizon, the back of the loch over there. And so we're very clear on what that is. But if we remove that top horizon, by just bringing the camera up at a slightly higher level to look down, you can have something like this. And at this point then, we are back into that abstraction, that we have a shape. Now, again, we've got, okay, so the reflection is darker than the actual subject that's sticking out of it. But, rotate it that way. We've now, even by rotating, we've now actually lost our sense of, it's even harder to kind of work out what it's supposed to be. Do it that way around. So you see, there's options to play with, and I think this notion of water, lack of horizon, lack of other reference points, and reflections is another way that you can really play around with reflections. So when you are thinking about a reflections challenge, whether for this podcast or you're thinking about for the likes of Photo Crowd, Guru Shots, Camera Club competitions, there's this notion of, in what way are we taking this reflection? Are we taking this idea of the reflection as having this kind of, you've got a very clear, obvious subject and a very clear, obvious reflection, and are they equally weighted? Is one weighted more than the other? Or are you actually using the reflection to, remove the framework and create this more abstract sense of what's going on? VG says, the reflection is sharp. Even if we rotate it, it will be tough to spot which one is real, which one is the reflection. And that's true. When you've got that absolute stillness of water, you really get that kind of mirror-like quality to it. Another version of this is quite simply this one, twigs in a puddle. Never underestimate puddles as an option to play around with here as well. So in this one, we can, if we look more closely, we can just about start to see bits of the ground through the water and other bits of leaves, and we can start to see where the twig is going under the water. But again, at a kind of a quick glance, this kind of has quite an abstract quality to it. The reflections, and also in this case, we're not going like with the reeds where it's a sort of single layer. There's a double layer going on. So this triangle here is different from this triangle here, which is slightly further forward to it. So the reflection isn't the same for the whole part. You've got one part which is being reflected, and then you've got a second part which is being reflected, and they are overlapping each other. So we're not going for that absolute, like the Aurora photo where, top and bottom are exactly the same. In this case, top and bottom are slightly different, but it still has that abstract feel because we don't have a direct edge to refer to. Hope this is all making sense. Then you can shift on to the idea of just the kind of the reflection itself, or where the reflection is the key part and the subject itself. So in this case, what we've got is this is a little harbour scene. I think it was where was it? Tarbert, I think, over in Butte. Doesn't really matter. There's a little harbour and there's a boat in the harbour, and the reflections in the harbour water are creating all this kind of sort of thing. But the photo here isn't about the boat and the reflections. It's about the reflections with just a little bit of boat in it. So that's kind of changing the balance of what is the narrative. Is the narrative about the reflection? Is the narrative about the subject that's causing the reflection? And that balance. And I keep talking about it because it's this bit that I really want to try and somehow instill in you, if you don't already have it, is this notion of there's the subject, there's the reflection. Or the reflection can be the subject, and then the subject is just the cause of the reflection, or what you would think. I'm calling it subject as opposed to, yeah. I'm tripping up over my own words here. I haven't got it all written out and nicely tidied up. But I'm sure you know what I mean. Is there the thing that causes the reflection, and then there is the reflection? And how is that balance? Where's the weight of it in terms of the narrative? Back to this very real point that I constantly come back to, because I think it's the most important aspect of photography, which is if you are taking a photo, if you are having that photo and you are wanting to show that photo is going to be looked at by somebody. Now that somebody might just be you at a later date, or that subject might be a friend that you're showing them on the phone, or that photo might be for a camera club competition, or because you're selling some prints at a local market, or you've got a friend who's written a book who's wanting you to put some images in. At any point, the point is that you have a photo and then there is an audience. And what happens is when you take that photo, you are trying to communicate some kind of message to that audience. And that message, that narrative, is the key part. And the clearer you can identify what it is you are trying to communicate, the easier it then becomes to communicate it. And if you can identify what it is you want to communicate at the point you're taking the photo, it becomes much easier again, rather than just going, oh, that's kind of interesting, take lots of photos, figure out the narrative afterwards, which we're all guilty of. I'm not going to say I'm not guilty of that sometimes. But what I'm saying is that the more we can get into a habit of going, every time I pull out my camera or I pull out my phone and I go, right, it's taking a moment to pause and go, what is it that's particularly interesting me about this scene in front of me? Is it the colour contrasts? Is it the difference between the foreground and background? Is it some kind of juxtaposition between two different subjects in action? Is it the fact that there's a reaction to something that's just happened? There's all these different narratives you can have. And what we're talking about today is the narrative where reflections are either the key part of the narrative or a supporting role within the narrative. But either way, that the reflections are an important part of the narrative. And then when we come back to something like this, or even let's say something like this, we have the rope. This might even be the same boat, but taken from a little bit further over. So there's a rope coming down here, but then that's straight, but then we've got the wiggle here, of the reflection. And it's that contrast between the straightness of the rope and the wiggle of the non-straightness of the reflection, which is the narrative. That's the bit that caught my attention. I'm looking at it going, oh, look, the reflection is different too. That's the bit that I find interesting. And then, so that's then had an effect of where I've decided to focus the camera. It's also had an effect in the editing process, because in the editing process, there was more colour about. There's reflections of the light is changing a lot on the water. There's these little bits of seaweed floating about. There might have even been other bits of debris as well. And by turning it into black and white and by shifting the contrast and paling out the water a bit, it's allowed me to emphasise that contrast there. Olmeg says, I really like the zigzag in the water. Lisa says, clarifying the narrative is something I struggle with. Maybe a podcast specifically about narrative. It's an interesting idea, Lisa, the idea of doing one specifically. But it's whether I do a specific podcast on it is almost kind of no, because it is everything. Okay, let me try and demonstrate. I often think there's an old story in photography which talks about levels of understanding, and the idea is that the amateur thinks photography is all about equipment. Okay, so better equipment, better photo. So you've got a better camera than I have, you've got a better lens than I have, therefore you can take better photos, right? Now, the more advanced person understands that it's not just about equipment, that actually it's technique. So you've got an understanding of composition. You understand rule of thirds. You understand maybe use of diagonals. So actually technique is kind of trumps the idea of just the equipment you're using. But then, as the thing goes, the master knows that it's light. And so this idea that actually if you understand light is really what is driving everything. But then that's where the little kind of smug moment of, oh, well, I'm a master, I understand light, ends. And it stops too quickly, because for me, there's another level above, which if you want to go above master, let's say the guru understands that it's narrative. And it is this idea that there's some form of communication. And if you just think about it this way, if you just think about the fact that if I want to, I've got a photo, this photo is of something. Now, it might be, this is a photo of a cup, but what is it about the cup that was making it interesting? Is it the shape of the cup? Is it the colour of the cup? Is it the colour of the cup next to something else? Is it the fact that the cup is being held by a hand and the textures are different? Is it about the fact that the cup is next to a crossword which has got a coffee stain on it, and so you're building a bigger story around that? That there are multiple stories. The stories don't have to be war and peace. They don't have to be massive. They can sometimes be just, I love the softness of the texture of this, or I like the contrast between this bit and this bit. Whatever that story is, that then dictates everything else. Once you understand that actually the narrative I want to communicate is insert whatever it is, then you adjust the lighting to emphasize that narrative, or you move around the object until you get the lighting, which helps to enhance that narrative. Everything then is about how do you enhance that narrative. So you look for ways to enhance it with the light. You look for it to enhance it with your technique and with your understanding of composition. Do I have this now in the center? Do I have it off to one side? Do I include the background? Do I isolate it? And then within all that, we come back to your camera, your equipment, and the settings. Well, do I have it on a shallow depth of focus? Do I have it on a wide angle? Do I zoom in on it? Do I need a big fancy DSLR, or can I get away with my phone? Okay, so the narrative is dictating everything afterwards. And if you start with the idea of, when I'm looking at a subject, going, what is it that I'm finding particularly interesting about it? And if you can identify that, then light, composition, technique, camera settings, everything follows it. All subsequent decisions become much, much easier, because how often are we in front of a scene and we're sure, I'm not sure, should I have it on f11? Should I have it on f2.8? Should I have my wide angle? Should I have my zoom? Should I be waiting for the sun to come out, or should I be waiting, or should I just photograph it in the rain while it's still here? Should I come back on a different day? We've got all these questions, and sometimes we end up feeling with this kind of overwhelm of possibility. But if you can narrow down, you can say, actually, what I love about this scene in front of me is the lines that sort of seem to recede into the distance, or whatever it is, then all these other questions get answered for you. Well, now, if I understand my composition, I can compose it this way. If I understand light, I can look for this kind of light to go with it. Maybe even understand that I have to come back on a different day, or with a different lens on, in order to be able to make the most of what I want. But it's understanding that narrative bit first is really what drives our photography. And this theme I come back to again and again and again. What does he say? I think I tend to overthink the narrative, perhaps. Yeah, it's very easily done. And there's a practice here. There's a practice of, well, just keep at it. Go, take it simple. Take it back to its bare bones. and say, can I sum this up in a couple of words? What is it that I love about the scene? I love the colours, or I love the colour contrast, or I love the texture, or I love the idea that it's nature versus man-made, or I like that dark area there against the light over here. Take it back to almost a fast instinct. What's the first thought that comes into your head? What is it that made me think, oh, that's interesting, I'll take a photo? Now, you might subsequently find a whole bunch of other things that you also want to explore with it, and that's fine. But I think the first starting point is, what is it that grabbed me about it immediately? And then investigate that. And then say, well, okay, now I understand that actually what I'm really interested in is the contrast between the softness of the petals of this flower and the harshness of the wall that it seems to be growing out of. Then you can kind of adjust your camera settings and everything else accordingly. But it's an exercise. It's something to keep practicing at. The more we do it, the more we're training our eye. And to go back to an idea I've talked about before, is that every day I go out for a walk, and I've always got my phone in my pocket. And one of the things I try to do, not always successful, but most of the time, 90% of the time I will take photos. Or there will come a point in my walk where I'll just stop and go, is there anything interesting here? Maybe there's a bit of a gatepost with a bit of moss growing out of it. Maybe there's a single leaf hanging off the end of a tree, even though it's winter and we've had all the storms. Or maybe I can't see anything that I haven't seen 100 times, so I just look down and I go, okay, well, there's a leaf on the ground, or there's my shoelaces. Take a moment to say, can I take a photo of something? So it's an observational exercise. Now, none of these photos that I take are ever going to appear on my Instagram account or be put up on Facebook or used for anything other than they are an exercise. In the same way that an artist does thumbnail sketches, in the same way that a musician plays scales. The musician doesn't turn up to a concert and play the scales in front of everybody. They do the scales so that they're building the muscle memory such that at the point they need to play, their fingers know where to go. And I do the same thing when I go out for a walk with my phone. I take lots of photos, not with the idea that these photos are going to be put in public domain, but they are creating a muscle memory in my eyes, with the connection between my eyes and my brain, such that at the point I do need to pull on my skills, at a point where I see something I really do want to take a photo of, or I'm even being paid to take photos of, then I can kind of get to the key point much more quickly. I can go, okay, what's the important point here? What do I need to adjust to make sure that that is being communicated, as opposed to obscured or distracted from by other elements. So it's a practice thing. So I would really encourage this idea of constant practice, not with the idea that every photo you take has to be somehow some brilliant thing that's capable of being shown to the public. It isn't. Just think of it like learning scales if you are playing an instrument. It's a practice so that when you do see something that you is really important, that you really would like to capture, you've got a much better idea of how to do it. I hope that's making sense, Lisa. But it's something we will revisit again and again and again as podcasts go on, because this notion of narrative underlies absolutely everything we do in photography. And it certainly underlies the way that I talk about photography. And part of that is because I never hear any other photographers talking about it. Photographers are always talking about camera settings. They're always talking about light. They might even be talking about composition techniques. Nobody ever talks about narrative. But to me, it is the most important part. And so that's why I keep on about it. Okay. Oh, Lisa says, thank you. Very helpful. Excellent. Thank you. And, Marilyn says, great viewpoint, Kim. Thank you. Excellent. Right. Okay. So where have we got to? We were playing around with this. Onto this one. Yes. Here's another example. Then where what we're doing is we're playing around with the obscurity. We don't necessarily have to stick to water and puddles and stuff. So you can find reflective surfaces. So in this case, there was an old vintage Bentley in a car. There was a vintage car rally, and all the cars had kind of gathered up in the car park across the road here in Castle Douglas, and there was a Bentley. And I thought, I started off, I was there with my phone, just there with my phone, and I took a couple of photos. I started off to take a photo of the badge and the little bits, that the mascot that kind of comes up. And then I noticed I really like the way my reflection just kind of became this sort of really distorted, tiny thing, legs coming up, my fingers sort of shooting out to the side. I really like that shape. That's an interesting shape. And you see somebody else here reflected. It's crazy mirrors. It's a hall of mirrors, isn't it? Where you've got this distorted surface and that changes things. So I thought, well, okay, can I just move around a little bit? And this is kind of, again, it's observational exercise idea. It's not put up a print and stick it in a frame. It might be if there was a photo crowd competition on distorted reflections in cars' surfaces, which photo crowd is quite good at throwing up these kind of very narrow, limited ideas. I might throw it into something like that just to see how it turns out. But it's fun. It's just a little bit of fun. And I'm standing, and you can see this sort of expanse of car park behind me. And you can even see the sun and the sky in the reflections. But it's that distorted reflection that was grabbing my eye. Here's another one where I was in again, this notion of using different surfaces. So this is a recording studio. So Firelight Trio, and it's my friends Ruth and Gavin. So part of I've done a whole series of photos of them across the summer. They've got a new album coming out very shortly. But I was photographing them while they were in the recording studio. And there's a bit where they were setting up over here, and there was a big grand piano in the thing. And I thought, oh, and I suddenly noticed the way that the microphone stand and what have you was reflecting in the top of the piano. And then likewise, Ruth's nickel harper here was reflecting here. And we ended up with these triangle zigzags going on, this reflection just in the top of the piano. And again, it's not necessarily award-winning photo, but I do quite like it. There's something fun about that notion of finding the reflective surface. And this is just polished wood. So this isn't even as much as the metal on that you got on the car earlier. This is just polished wood, but it is so polished that you do get these reflections happening. And these reflections then just create this slightly different off-kilter narrative to what's going on. Beyond that, you can also, like I said, puddles. Puddles are fun. And again, if you're not wanting to get your camera wet or you're not wanting to get an earful of water, these things, your mobile phones are great, because your mobile phone, usually you can just drop it down at a tiny, you can get right down to ground level, turn it upside so you make sure the camera's at the bottom of, and you can just get right down to puddle level and just tap on the back. And you can get, find a puddle, muddy puddle here, and automatically you're now starting to get this kind of split screen idea. And for that matter, here's an example of where actually I've rotated the image and this one, I've rotated the image quite deliberately, and the rotated image is actually part of the story, because in the end what we had, there was a puddle and there'd been a bit of resurfacing going on, and basically, well, if I turn that round, you can see that what we've got a sign saying skid risk, maximum speed 20, and it's just one of these temporary signs in front of a puddle, and that's fine like that, and I've got it down, I've got the reflection of it. But in fact, I thought it was more amusing when you've got skid risk and you're actually seeing it upside down. Maybe it's just me. Part of my head goes that, maybe you have skidded, you're now lying on your back, or you're upside down, or your car's turned upside down, and you're actually seeing seeing the whole world upside down. So a little bit of fun. Sometimes you can take that notion of inverting the reflection and make that part of the narrative as well. So I hope this is all making sense. So at this point, quick little reminder that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining even, buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can support these podcasts. By the way, don't forget to click like on the video if you've not done so far already. Like is always a good one. I'm desperately hoping that one day YouTube may show these videos to more people who are interested in photography, and it will show it to more people if more people have liked it. So like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe, click the notification bell, is there a click for a recommend? I don't know. Tell your friends about it anyway. So yes, what we're going to do now then is we're going to move on to the notion of mirrors, because we've been using water as a key kind of reflection bit, but there's also the notion of mirrors. So that's fine if you're outdoors, but not everybody is outdoors. The weather doesn't always allow us to be outdoors either. So there's a notion of mirrors. So if we take something like this one was taken back in, well, during COVID times. This is at the UPwKA galleries. And I was in the lift, the elevator, and here we've got one of the staff there is coming in to give everything a squirt and wipe it down. And I take a quick photo, and what's grabbing me here is all the reflective surface. You know, there's this kind of polished metal side of it as well, so the light is kicking about. But practically all lifts or elevators have a big mirror, and the design of that is very deliberate because it's a small space and it can feel quite claustrophobic. By having a mirror, it essentially doubles the size of the space mentally. So it halves your level of claustrophobia as such. But these mirrors in elevators can be quite interesting as well. And then what we've got, so we've got the door, but we've got the reflection of the door, we've got the reflection of the staff member as well. So this is just a kind of a quick grab the shot, and it's kind of fun. But the mirror here has a very definite fact that we can see that there is a mirror. There's a frame around the mirror. Now, if we move on to something like this, the mirror is implied. Okay, so this photo of Richard with his mohawk looking at his reflection in the mirror. And what we're playing around with here is the notion of echoes and implications and what have you. So we're seeing the back of the head here, and then we're seeing his face here. And the focus is on the face so the focus is on the reflection. The reflection is the bit we're seeing. Now, if we didn't have this back of the head on the right, we wouldn't necessarily know that it was a reflection we were looking at. Okay, so we've, in a way, this could also just be two punks looking at each other, but we're probably fairly certain that it's a mirror reflection. So it's the implication there rather than necessarily having to see the mirror frame itself. What's Nadia says? Nadia says, talking about the phone, Kim, it can be fun using the surface of the phone as a reflective. Okay, let's tell you what, let's just, let's so now, where would I put, you might have to bear with me while I just do this. So I've got my phone out now, it's switched off. Okay, now, so it's switched itself on. I switch it off. If I put it like that, there we go. You can see now that there's a reflective surface here, and I can tilt that around. Now, depending on where I place it, there's a limit here of how much I can do here, but you can see that there is a reflective surface here. And so you can play with that. Now, if you want to take the photo with the phone, you'll have to grab somebody else's phone because obviously you're then using it as a reflective surface. But you're absolutely right, Nadia, that I have seen photos where people have done this, where essentially you grab your mate's phone or whatever, and then you have some fancy building in the background or something interesting, and then you use this as a reflective surface. You place your camera here so that you're getting the reflection of whatever's over there at the same time. Okay, so you essentially turn your phone into the equivalent of a puddle or body of water to create that kind of reflection. I dare say you could probably do it that way as well, but I think because a phone that's not on tends to have a black surface. I suppose maybe what you could also do for that matter is if you created a picture of something just white and then had that picture on your phone, then that would become a much brighter reflective surface. So there's options to play around with that. Fiji says, lovely reflection, hairstyle captured well, and light and darkness looks amazing. Okay, so back to here. Yeah, so we're also playing around with that notion of side light and what have you. Another version of this is this one here. Some of you may have seen this one before. So again, what we've got is the implied reflection. It's far less likely, whereas this one could be two different people looking at each other. This one, we're practically certain it is the same person because the hair's the same frizziness. We can see even a bit of the jacket over here. The fact is, her action is saying, I'm putting lipstick on, which is something you generally do in the mirror as well. However, to be careful, right? come back to, if we look at sort of a photo like this, some of you may remember this when we were doing selective colour. I was using the upper part of this and did the red lips. But if we take a photo like this, zoomed in or not, she's sticking a lipstick on, but actually there's no mirror, but there's no forward reflection either. There's no reference point to the idea that this is a reflection. And so this photo here, I'm wanting to use as a warning that if you are putting a photo in for a reflections challenge, whether it's for the one that I'm setting or whether it's for your camera club or anything else, there has to be the notion that it is a reflection, and that you can, and that the viewer can tell that it's a reflection. And there isn't any obvious noticing, because this photo could have been taken with you standing next to the mirror. So this is actually her in real life, and she's just looking at the mirror that's taken to one side of you. So there's no guarantee that this is in fact a reflection. So you do have to be careful about that. So the little word of warning is, if you are entering an image into a reflections challenge, it has to be noticeable that it is a reflection. You've got to give the clues that the reflection is there. Otherwise, you will either get marked down, or if it's a crowd vote, so it's just going to go over the top of people's heads. So the more people have to work it out, the less chance you're going to get your vote for it. Now, the other great thing about mirrors is that sometimes the mirrors allow you to get into angles and to take shots from angles that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise be able to get into. So if we take a look at this kind of melee, this sort of mix of, so what we've got is we've got a model here where makeup is being applied, hairdressers are sorting stuff out, there's a ring light here, lighting everything up, and this is all happening 2 foot away from the mirror. You can, a couple of feet. You can see here there's a mug sitting on a little ledge and the reflection of the mug. Okay, so now the thing is I couldn't take this photo from the other side, and because I would have then been, if the mirror's here and the action is here, I couldn't get in close enough. I couldn't get the camera around to actually capture this action. So in order to be able to capture this action, I've had to photograph into the mirror and get the reflection bounced back out. So sometimes then, when you think about reflections are allowing you to get into places that you wouldn't otherwise normally be able to reach. So think about mirrors that way. That's another option to think about. Sometimes, in this case, this is pretty much the same angle at a slightly different point in the action, and you've got your photographer has now appeared into the photo itself. In this one, I'm maybe at a slight angle and I'm sort of slightly hidden by other pieces and bits of shoulders and stuff like this. With this one, somebody stood back. So at that point, again, the only way I can get the front of her face in shot is via the reflection. I can't do it directly. Vici says, lovely reflection hairstyle, captured well in the light and dark. Oh, right, sorry, yeah, that was actually going back to the one with the punk. So now sometimes you get competitions about capturing yourself in the mirror. And of course, you with these sort of selfies in the mirror kind of stuff, then you can get lots of shots. Most people are just going to their bathroom mirror and taking a photo. Something like this, I think tends to be a bit more interesting, because what you're doing is you're capturing an action going on, and what you're seeing is the photographer as part of what's going on, rather than as the only thing that's going on. Now, if this one, you're getting the photographer in the mirror, this is one where we had to try and angle the mirror so that the photographer wasn't in the mirror. So I've talked about this picture in the past as well, but essentially this one was set up for so for Anne here, who's putting on the lipstick. She'd written a book, the themes of which were all around sex, death and humour, and so we created this narrative scene, very film noir, femme fatale kind of feel. We notice her sticking on a lipstick, then we notice the woman sitting on the bed in the background, then we notice the guy with a knife sticking out of his back. Here we've got the frame mirror. This is, a dressing table going on. So the frame of the mirror is really important. But the thing about this is the fact that all the action, again, is happening inside the reflection. And so it's that thing of where the story is happening in the mirror. And to go back to our kind of Alice through the looking glass idea, that we're into another world that's going on. And this kind of has, for Anne, in the real world, our world, all we're seeing is the back of the head. But then we're seeing her reflection, but we're not just seeing her reflection. It's not unlike Abby, who earlier was she's looking at her own reflection and she's sticking on her lipstick. As Anne's putting on her lipstick, she's not looking at herself, she's looking at us. So we, the viewer, are now being dragged into the story. She's clocked us. It's like we've walked into the room and now we can see what's going on. But maybe we haven't seen what's directly going on, but now we can see something's going on via the mirror. So the little point I wanted to make specifically about this is, how do I take a photo like this, which appears to be pretty much straight on, but not be in the photo myself? Okay, so if this one is about, okay, the photographer's in the mirror, how come the photographer isn't in the mirror in this one? And basically what's happened is we've tilted the whole chest of, the table and mirror by about 25 to 30 degrees. Now, because we don't have, the camera is flat, it's two-dimensional, it doesn't actually have depth vision, it's not necessarily obvious that the right side of the mirror is significantly closer to the camera than the left side of the mirror, especially as the left side of the mirror is being slightly blocked by Anne in the first place. So what's actually happened is I've stood at an angle, the mirror's at an angle, I'm bouncing it off so that we can then get the image of the bed and everything, which is over on a different wall. So sometimes tilting the mirror a little bit is what's going to allow you to capture a scene but not be in actually directly in the mirror yourself, in the reflection. Right, hope this is all making sense. Lots of information we're charging through here. Another thing with mirrors actually is the idea that they don't have to be big. Sometimes you can play around with the small mirrors. In this case, what we've got here, we've got this the scene with girls in the vintage dress in the vintage car. They are eyeing up each other. She's standing in front of the car. She's the one on the right here looks like she's driving. The other one's stopping her from moving forward. Now, the one who's sitting behind the wheel of the car, we can't see her face, but in the rear view mirror, we see her eyes, and her eyes then become part of the narrative. And the fact that her eyes are then just below the face of the woman she's looking at then create the story. So the fact that we can't see the driver's face, we've managed to move that narrative over into the reflection. And that becomes an important part of how we've managed to construct this bit of narrative. The fact that these two women are on a face-off kind of stuff, that there's emotion going between them, that there's a sense of something happening in that connection. So that notion of little mirrors to just pull out extra bits of information can be quite interesting. This one, again, here where we've got Rebecca, and she's holding a mirror to look at herself. Now, she's not seeing us, but this photo has very much this sort of sense that we're kind of looking, almost like a voyeur. We're looking where we perhaps shouldn't be, accentuated also by the netting coming down here. And there's almost a slight sense of danger that if she just tilts that mirror just a fraction more round, she might suddenly notice us noticing her. So there's so the story here, the dynamic becomes quite interesting. I mean, in this one, we're watching the scene, but this is like watching the scene in a movie or something. You're looking at this, but you're not thinking, well, the guy with the camera is actually sitting in the back seat, unless you are analysing the photo rather than being in the photo, being in the story. Whereas with this one, you get the feeling that you are the one looking. There's much more of a kind of, the photographer is being more of a voyeur in this case. And that sense that the mirror might suddenly catch us out in a way like this one, where we are now, because Anne is looking at the photo, looking at us, we have been caught out. We have stepped into the room. We have been noticed as being the one who is observing. So there's all sorts of interesting, complicated layers that you can play around with as a viewer, as an observer, as a voyeur. How are you being seen? How much is the photographer? How much is the viewer an actual part of the narrative, as well as just what it is you're seeing? And I love playing around with those kind of dynamics. So We've talked largely about the notion of using bodies of water for reflecting, whether it's lakes or whether it's puddles, distorted surfaces or other surfaces, whether it's reflections in bits of bent metal in cars or whether it's surfaces of polished wood, or even using the surface of a phone as a reflective surface itself. We then talked about the notion of mirrors and how you can have mirrors where you could see the frame of the mirror, or where you're implying the idea of the mirror is there, or whether a small mirror can affect the whole direction of where the narrative is going, where your eye is being drawn. The last bit that I want to move on to before I tell you all what's coming up over the next month is the notion of windows, because windows are glass, like a mirror, reflective surface, except for the fact that very often with windows you are then seeing something through it, and this is the next bit that I want to talk about. So if, for example, we flick onto a shot like this, so what's grabbing my... I'm walking down the road at this point, I have to be out for my evening walk. The colours in the skies are just glorious. We've got this fantastic red in the clouds, and we're up in the clouds, and this gorgeous gold in the skies just after the sun has just dropping behind the horizon, just clipping the bits of clouds. Lovely colours. And then I noticed that these colours are also being reflected in the car window. And I thought, well, can I try and capture that? So I'm moving around, again, taken with the phone, just moving left and right, trying to find a place where I'm getting the reflection. But it's not just a mirror reflection, because also, as well as the reflection, we can see the car steering wheel. We can see the house behind. We can see other bits within the car and through the car. But we're also getting the reflections of the mirror that's turned in here. So it's not a mirror reflection, it's a window reflection. It's a glass reflection where we're partly seeing through the glass and we're partly seeing what's being reflected. And so this then becomes another layer of reflection. We're building up layers within our image. If we take something like this, maybe a much more straightforward one, cat in the window, we've got the cat, but we've got all the tree as well being reflected in it. We've got the outside. And so rather than just having a cat in the window, the reflection is giving us this sense of the world that it is looking out at. So we're faced this way, the cat is faced this way, and the reflection is allowing us to see what the cat is looking at in a way, although it's probably looking down at the ground level. But it's giving us a different sense that this isn't a cat in a house with an urban background. It's not like another house or street scene in the background. This scene happens to be one of trees, so it could be a garden or it could be out in the country. So your reflection here is adding to the narrative of the cat. It's not just the cat sitting in the window looking out. There's a slightly bigger story of the context of the cat sitting in the window looking out. And a different reflection is going to create a different narrative, a different story. Now, April says the clouds are neat looking. Right, that'd be about that one. Yes, they were amazing clouds. This one here, again, some of you may have seen before, which is to go back, it's the same girl we saw the eyes in the mirror in the car. In this case, what happened was I noticed that there was some cherry blossom on the trees, and we sort of wheeled the car round so that the car was sitting underneath the cherry blossom. And then I've got an off-camera flash with a little bit of orange perspex, little orange gel over the front of the flash, so that when it goes off, it's lighting her up from somebody else is holding that off to one side. So it looks like there's a kind of a sunset kind of coming through the window, just lighting her up, this little kind of golden light. But at the same time, we've got the reflection of all this cherry blossom in the window and partially starting to obscure her face. Okay. And what that does then is it adds this extra layer. Now, to get the balance right, you have to play around with the balance of light. If I got the flash too strong, it would have blown out the reflections. If I didn't have the flash strong enough, then the reflections become too dominant. You can't really see her. So you've got to play around with the light just to get the balance right as you want. But to my mind, because Eva here is looking really thoughtful, as though she's reflecting on something's maybe happened, or she's recalling, or she's planning, you get the feeling of a lot of internal work going on, but you don't know what that internal work is. But I think having the reflections through the, we're not just seeing her sitting in the back of the car, we've got these reflections, is kind of adding to this sense of a thought process. It's adding layers of implied narrative to what's going on. Oh, Lisa says, took me a while to work out this one. The cat one, she means, yes. But yes, because with the cat one, the reflection over the cat isn't quite so obvious. The cat being brighter than the reflection stands out, so the reflection drops into the background. But with this one, this is what I mean about the balance of light as such, so that you're trying to get the fact that we can still see her face, but the reflected cherry blossom almost becomes part of the thought process and the narrative within it. And then we have a picture like this of Robin Yasin Kassab, who's a writer, and he's got a wonderful writer's hut out in the garden, where there's a limit. Well, I wanted to take a photo. He's got this full bookcase going on. He's got all this stuff that I wanted to have in the background. I wanted to have a shot of him, but the hut itself is relatively small, and I couldn't actually get a photo of him with the bookcase behind him while inside the hut itself, not at the level that I wanted. So I decided to step outside and take it through the window, because he's nestled in the Galloway Hills, and he's got this glorious view out the window. And so we can now see the glorious view as well. We can see the hill up here. We can see the field. We can see the sky. We can see the trees. So now what we've got is we've got Robin here. The door is open on the right, which is allowing the light to come in and just light him up. So there's enough of the back, so we can look at Robin. We can look past him and see all the books on the shelves. We can look at the table. We can see the coffee pot. We can see the pens. We've got his notebooks and a glass and all the rest of it. There's even a log burner in the background. In fact, actually, there's even a little bit of flame in the log burner if we want to really hunt that out. But we can also subtly shift our mental sets and then get a sense of the landscape that's actually being reflected in the window. So he's looking thoughtful. He's looking off into the distance, but we can actually see what it is he's looking at. And so we're getting a combination here of a bit like what the cat was. You're looking at the cat, he's looking out, and we can see the environment that the cat is actually in. And we're also getting a bit of that effect that we had with Eva in the car with the cherry blossom reflection, where the reflection becomes part of the thought process that's going on. So this sense then of using reflections, not as absolute, but as partial, because that it then kind of helps to add in this sort of sense of layers of narrative, is another way that you can really get in and play around with reflections. Fiji says, dramatic, Kim, your portraits are excellent. Reflection combined with portraiture are a class apart. Lisa says, amazing. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. But what I'm really wanting to try and get across here is this idea of ways of thinking about it, ways of thinking that maybe taking photos of people through windows, or cats or dogs or pets or whatever, or other things going on the other side of the window, and the reflection can help you build up these double layers of narrative or triple layers of narrative. The final photo I want to show you, some of you, I can't remember, I think I've maybe talked about this one before, some of you may remember, was this Cluedo shoot that I did. And so now, interestingly, this bit, the very bit that I want to show you, is now hidden by me up in the top corner of your screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just resize this for a moment, so that you can see the full picture, which is here. Because what we have here is, so this was a family photo shoot which was Cluedo themed. So the family didn't want to have a family photo shoot just like where everybody's sort of standing there on a white sheet looking awkward, or all in front of a tree wearing matching shirt and jeans, right? They wanted to do something a bit more interesting, and they love playing board games. They came up with this idea of doing Clue. So we set up this Cluedo table, or Clue, I think is the game as it's known in North America. And we set it up a bit like a high stakes poker game, and they all dressed up as their favourite characters. So Jean here is Miss Scarlet, her son is Colonel Mustard, his partner's Professor Plum. They're playing the game. They've got all these props. So we've got the rope, we've got the lead piping, we've got the spanner, all that kind of stuff. Lots of fun creating this photo. But the key bit that I want to talk about here is that they have a mirror up on the right here, and there's a reflection in the mirror. And in the reflection in the mirror, one of the things you notice is the way that the light is hitting Jean's glasses. So there's one of the flashes that I'm using is just catching the light. We've got this little starburst of orange light capturing the light in the glass, in the mirror reflection, except she's not wearing glasses. Okay, so why has she got a reflection in the glasses? So essentially what happened here, this is very deliberate. This isn't an accident. This is very deliberate. When I'm doing this shot, I'm taking multiple photos. We're making little adjustments here, shift an arm here, shift the camera angle there. I'm constantly hunting around to find the best image. Now, for everything else, this was the best image. This was the best composition, the best angle, the best lighting, the best version of this photo. Except for the fact that in this version of the photo, in the mirror, I was catching one of my lights and the reflection just didn't work properly. So I thought what I would do is I would swap the reflection out. I would take a reflection from one of the other shots to place in the mirror. But there was a constant theme that what was going on here is when I did this photo shoot, I tethered the camera to a tablet, right? A Google Pixel tablet, and a bit like an iPad, so that when I could go click, the picture would come up on the pad. This would allow me to then show everybody else what was going on. So I would take the photo, show everybody, and then other people were kind of contributing. And I could say, well, okay, you can see here, Jean's leaned too far forward, or Mrs. White has moved too far forward, and Rebecca's moved too far forward, and she's blocking her mother. Or maybe it would look quite good if we had an arm stretching into the table. And then Professor Plum says, oh, what if it would look like I was looking over his shoulder sneakily looking at his cards? And we go, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Try that. So by having that tablet there allowed other people to contribute to how the photo was taking shape. But what happened was Jean needs glasses in order to be able to see close up. And so she would pull out her glasses, take a look, we'd have a little discussion, and she'd sit down, everybody take up their positions. I'd go click, and just at the point I go click, we suddenly remember that Jean had her glasses on. Well, to be honest, most of the time, Leah would turn around and go, Mum, you've left your glasses on. I'd go, all right, sorry. Take the glasses off, tuck them under her lap, do the photo again. But this happens so often. You have multiple times. There would suddenly be this shout of, Mum, you've left your glasses on. And so when I came to replace the reflection, I decided to deliberately use one of the reflections where she had her glasses on. Okay, so this idea then of swapping out the reflection and to allow me to create an extra layer of narrative, because this photo isn't going to anybody else. This photo is for the family. It was commissioned for this family. This family have it. They maybe print it up, put it on the wall, whatever they do. But when they look at the photo, it's like a little Easter egg. It's like a little extra thing, which is very, very specific to them. And 99% of people would never notice that little detail. Once you know the detail is there, it then becomes a stronger part of the narrative. So these little kind of hidden ideas that you can always have fun with in a photo as well. So that was the last thing that I really wanted to talk about with the notion of reflections. So what have we got there? April said very creative idea, and she also says, I've just realised they have all the weapons on the table for the game. Yes, they sorted out all the props as well as their costumes for the shoot, which was a lot of fun. So in the end then, to kind of sum up where we are with reflections allow us to enhance the narrative or even become the narrative. So the reflection is either what the photo is about, or it is supporting what the photo is about, or it is even in equal footing with what the photo is about. So the photo is completely about the subject and its reflection. But then you've got different ways of playing with this. You can have a kind of a landscape scene using water, and if you get very still water, you get these very mirror-like reflections. But if you've got ripply water, you can get very abstract reflections where it's not a straight line stops being straight, it becomes wiggly. So you've got potential to play around with that. But you don't have to have something as big as a lock. Even something like a puddle can create interesting reflections, as can actually the surface of a phone, as was pointed out. So you've got that notion there of using water But we can also use actual mirrors. We can use mirrors, but again, you need to remember, whether it's mirrors or water or anything like that, that if it's for a reflection contest, then you need to make sure that it's understood that it is a reflection. If you just do the reflection and you don't do any reference around it, then you might fail at that point. But you can also, by isolating an area with a reflection, you can create quite abstract images too. But then you've also got this idea of the use of glass, whereby you're getting partial reflection, but then you can see through the glass as well. And getting the light balance on that becomes absolutely critical and crucial. So the point with this is that there are all sorts of different ways you can use reflections. Now, to go back to Nicola's original suggestion, she wanted to know more about reflections. I hope, Nicola, that this has given you a broad place to play around with. So on the back of all this, in 2 weeks' time, so what's the 7th today? So on the 21st of December, we are going to have the Reflections Challenge. So I want you to take some of what you've learned and put it into place, whether you want to sort of just fill up a little tray with water and do something at home with a bit of still life, whether you want to go outside, find a muddy puddle and get your phone down into it, whether you want to go and find a loch, whether the weather is good for, whether if it's raining and you're getting interesting ripple patterns, or whether it's foggy and still and you're getting these interesting kind of isolated, abstract reflections. That there are 1,000 different ways you can play with reflections, and I want you to go out and I want you to play, and then send me your images. And at this point, then we're back up to the idea of, I've created this new email address, Kim Ayres podcast. I suddenly forgot what it was. I think UPwKA@gmail.com. Send me your image there, or we have the Facebook or the Flickr group. Stick your image in that. Tell me a little bit about the story. Tell me a bit about the narrative. What is it that grabbed you about it? Why you're interested in it? And send us, put the image in. Try and get it in by no later than Friday the 19th. Because I have to have time to put these podcasts together. But send me your images, and then you'll get 10 smug points just for sticking your image in. I'll give out a bonus 30, 20 and 10 for my favourites, and of course there's the crowd favourite as well for a potential bonus 20 smug points as well. But beyond the idea of smug points, the idea is to play, to have fun, to enjoy it, to explore the notion of what reflections can do. How can you enhance a narrative? How can you create a new narrative using that notion of reflections in photography? Multiple ways you can have fun with this. Other little bits to come up then are, now next week then is going to be a feedback session. Next week will be the last feedback session of the year, I think. So if you would like some feedback on your photography, send me your image, tell me what your sticking points are. I mean, maybe even if you're having a problem this week trying to do a reflection, it's not working right, you could even put in a reflection photo for me to get feedback on, to get ideas of where you want to go. But it's not strictly stuck to that. You can, any topic you like, send me your image and I will give you feedback. Feedback is genuinely the best way of learning to improve your photography, to get past our own blind spots. So once again, you can either send it to UPwKA@gmail.com, or you can stick it in the Facebook group or the Flickr group. And again, tell me what your sticking points are and I will do my best to help. So try and get your images in earlier this week. The earlier the better for making it. Now, the week between Christmas and New Year is the 28th. I haven't yet I'm thinking about, maybe if anybody wants to tell me whether this is a good idea or not, I was thinking actually about doing a selection of my favourite of your submissions across the year. So I'll go and look back through the photos, unless somebody else has got another idea. I think I'm going to go back and look through the submissions that everybody's put in through the year, and we'll have a wee sort of kind of celebration of my favourite images of what you sent in. And then the first one into January, which I think is the 4th of January, will be our traditional best of the previous year. Now that's going to be slightly different to the idea of so my selection is just going to be my enjoyment of your photos, but the best of is what you consider to be your best photo of 2025. And that might be your best because it achieved the most accolades in competitions you put it in, or it might be your best just because you achieved something that you set out to try and do and you feel really quite pleased with it. So whatever your definition of best of, that's what's coming up. But in the meantime is going to be the feedback session for next week. So stick your images in for feedback. And if you haven't done so already, remember to like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And if you're really feeling generous and you want to support these podcasts, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is the way to do it. Susan says, great idea, Kim. There have been some superb images this year. Okay, well, that's good. I think I probably will go ahead with that. Right, I think that's pretty much us. Thank you ever so much to Nicola for coming up with the idea on reflections. Thanks to each of you for your contributions, your thoughts, your feedback, your ideas. And I hope that you really have a much better idea of what reflections are all about. And I really look forward to seeing what you're going to put in for the Reflections Challenge for 2 weeks' time. Take care. Look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.